Yes, folks, thank you very, very much indeed for giving us your time today and coming along to this session, How Do Small Indies Get a Look In? I'm Stuart Cosgrove, Director of Creative Diversity at Channel 4, and periodically you'll see me peering like that because the stage lights are so powerful that it's quite difficult for us to see the whites of your eyes. So I'll periodically do that as if I'm doing some kind of side thing in a Shakespearean show, looking yonder and hither and thither to the other side of the world. But I can see you when I do that, so don't feel too intrigued or intimidated by that. It is a fantastic venue, no question about that. Layer upon layer of what appears to be a kind of really nice cake from one of those trendy sort of big cupcake shops. And it's lovely as well to be in a theatre of this kind of history. It reminds me of an age-old story, and I hope it doesn't apply to us today, that in the Pavilion Theatre in Glasgow, they used to have this adage where they would say that no turn would go unstoned. And it always made me think that there was something fearful about being on the Victorian or Edwardian stage. But here we are today at the Lyceum in Sheffield to discuss How Do Small Indies Get a Look In? I thought before I introduce the panel that it might be a good thing really to just set the scene here, because clearly for delegates at Sheffield, access to the commissioning culture, the commissioning process across all broadcasters is self-evidently an important part of their work and their passion and their life. Equally, I think it's true to say too that we're in an industry that's changing in all sorts of fascinating, challenging, exciting and sometimes threatening ways. Not only is there new mechanisms for sharing, publishing and interacting with content via web-enabled services and platforms, nonetheless it's also the case that the world is also to some extent shrinking, and more commonly than ever before, producers from here in the UK or other parts of Europe and the world are often much more used to talking about international co-production and doing deals, hence the success of Sheffield's famous meat market, where production companies or producers go to pitch some of their new ideas. But I think that probably the biggest changes of all have been, at least here in the UK, the kind of huge sort of sectoral changes that we've witnessed over the last 10 years in the UK, with, first of all, the consolidation of indies to the rise and rise of what we now routinely call the super indies, those big companies that are themselves either listed in the stock exchange or are part of aggregated groups of companies, and who often are engaged in some of television's most recognisable and replicable TV brands. Set against that is another story, which is a slightly different one, which is to do with television and its own ways of working. I think it'd be fair to say that over the last 10 years, we've seen the rise and rise of very, very big returning factual brands on television. These can be factual entertainment shows, formatted shows, big documentary, rig-based shows, many of which, by the nature of their production process, require companies to have a degree of skill, but also a degree of scale in their ability to maybe take on the big returning challenges that television often demands of its output. But alongside that is also the process, something that's discussed a lot, I think, at the festival, is the increasing miniaturization of the means of production, particularly camera technology, post-production technology, whatever, which can, of course, favour smaller just-do-it producers who may be self-shooters, maybe producer-directors, or people that are actually allowed and willing to go into areas of kind of deep access in order to frame ideas that mainstream production companies maybe are less willing, less able, less nimble to do. I think it's often fair to say as well that there's another strand of documentary production. I think it was Malcolm X that came up with the best description of it when he said, by any means necessary. I meet a lot of documentarians through my work at Channel 4, and over the years who just have such an overwhelming emotional passion for a project or a subject or an area of activity that they're determined to make the film by any means necessary, sometimes through self-denial, in the sense that they're maybe not paying themselves going rates, that they're maybe working with friends, using downtime at post houses and whatever, a whole mix of different things. So we've got a lot to talk about in this session. I think we've got to talk about the role of the broadcasters, the various different notions of what an indie means, what does scale mean. It's quite interesting, even if you look at that very simple question, what would a small indie be and how would we define that? Curiously enough, under legislation for the government and for the European Union, the so-called SME, the small to medium-sized enterprise business, would be something with a staff of around 250,000 or more. Well, for most indies in the documentary production sector, that's a bizarre kind of way of measuring scale and size. And yet, some of our most powerful documentaries are made by very, very small companies who may only be 2 or 3 key creatives and the freelance staff that they bring in when their production is at its height. So much to talk about, a lot to analyse, and hopefully we'll take away from it heat as well as light. And I quite like to focus a wee bit on the light bit of it, because I think sometimes in sessions like this you can sense that people get frustrated, and especially if people feel locked out of a system, understandably there can be frustration. But I think also if there's light at the end of these sessions about what things broadcasters can do better and what takeaways we can take from it, so much the better. I've been joined by a great panel to discuss this, because it's a panel that mixes broadcasters, commissioners, independents from various different parts of the UK. And so without further ado, I'm going to first up introduce Samantha Ansis, Specialist Factual at BBC Three. And I'm going to ask Samantha to introduce herself and give us a wee flavour for the types of things she's currently working on. I'll then be coming to Mark Raphael of Channel 4. On my far left there, Nick Kerwin, who has been 9 years at LWT and 2 at Mentorn as head of Folio before he launched Firefly, renamed Dragonfly. So we'll come to Nick. Dermot Lavery here to my near left, who is the producer of double band films in Northern Ireland, and directly next to me on the left, Natasha Dack, who's co-managing director of Tiger Lily. Now, Natasha's also been really good, because she's been out and about speaking to various different people, many of whom will be in the audience, and taken, admittedly by her, a not particularly scientific survey of what some indies really think about television and about broadcasting, and she's going to share that with us quite soon. But without further ado, let's start with you, Samantha. Why don't we get you to introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about what you do, and maybe answer a very simple question: how do small indies get a look in?
So I work with Charlotte Moore in documentaries. I'm part of her team, mainly working on 3, although some looking after some things on 1. And I also look after formats and features and specialist factual, working with Harry Lansdowne as well. So sort of very big slate. Do you want me to talk about things I'm excited about?
Yeah, why don't you do that?
Yeah.
And things that are around, and maybe the sorts of things you do and don't do. Yeah. And then maybe how do small indies get a look in?
Yeah.
Do what you do.
So I mean, at the festival, you see My Brother the Islamist, which has got a sort of interesting story, because one filmmaker came to us with that, and he wasn't attached to an indie. I can talk a bit about that later. But the things that are in the pipeline that are kind of hitting the screens very, very soon are Kids Behind Bars, which is a very exciting series which has taken a year of Emma Wakefield's life, actually more than that, because it's something she started about 4 years ago, which is access to a secure unit called Vinnie Green, which houses some of the most troubled children in the country, some that are there for their own protection, and some that have committed very, very serious crime. And Emma's a complete sort of tour de force. And we commissioned straight away 3 eps of that, and it's been a really interesting process working with her. And another thing that's about to hit the screens from a small indie is Small Team Big World, which we commissioned as a single last year as part of the adult season, and we've turned into a series, and it's quite a remarkable series, actually. I was talking about it in the other session. And sort of, are you interested in me talking about what I'm looking for?
Well,
or?
I think we'll come to that later on, because I think that's one of the things that I was hoping would be some of the kind of light towards the end of the tunnel of this debate. So why don't we leave that till later on, Sam? Just one question to get us going is a lot of people, particularly if they're coming from the perspective of a micro indie, and by that I'm meaning maybe a relatively small producer-director indie who may only have themselves and a couple of members of their team or whatever, can often look at the BBC as quite a big, monolithic, chunky, big organisation that plays a dominant role not only in production but in our society. And often, when you hear about it, some of the kind of remarks that you hear about it feeling labyrinthine, difficult to understand, intimidating, a law unto itself, you know, all of these things. Do you feel that they're entirely fair? Is that what it feels like in the inside?
I think that we try and make ourselves as accessible as possible. But let's face it, you know, there's a huge amount of indies, masses, and beyond that, there's hundreds of filmmakers. And I'm new to commissioning. I'm sort of 18 months down the line. In my first year, I saw everyone. I mean, I saw someone who turned up with his wife, and it was only at the end of the meeting did I realise that she wasn't a program maker at all. You know, I kind of opened my door to the world, and actually, unless you want to have a nervous breakdown, you can't continue with that policy. So then I think the question is, what's the most effective way as a small indie if you don't have a relationship with a commissioner to get through? And often that is just sort of plugging in to things like Sheffield, coming and hearing what we're looking for, and then either sort of sending an email with a just headline idea, or more effective than that, the roughest sort of taster of a contributor possible. I mean, I've been pitched stuff with mobile phone footage that I've commissioned, actually. So it doesn't have to be polished. It doesn't cost a fortune. I mean, there's some very, very clever filmmakers out there who are wizards with technology, and that doesn't have to be expensive. So there's lots of things that have been that I've commissioned. That
have started from quite kind of small acorns, if you like,
Completely, and I think, we work in a visual medium. So, my hatred is of proposals that are this thick. I'm just not going to read them.
Because they feel that they belong in the world of the library and the PhD rather than in a visual medium, and you don't presumably commission words, you commission narratives that derive from characters, and therefore...
Completely, and even if it's sort of a YouTube clip of a contributor, from that you get a real sense of the kind of, the character themselves. But even indeed, then it's very easy to sort of think and talk with the indie about the tone and approach, which are then kind of key to a commission.
Okay, I'm going to jump over here and then come to Mark. So Nick, if I could come to you, why don't you similarly just introduce yourself, the company, and where you fit in the world. How does a small indie get a look in?
Okay, my name's Nick Cohen. I am, as you said before, I started as a journalist. I went to Mentorn, and then I started Firefly, which became then known as Dragonfly, which I sold and then subsequently left. And I've started now The Gardens, a new indie that we've been going for just under a year.
Yeah. So can I just be inquisitive and try and kind of get to the bottom of why you wanted to sell up, Nick, and set up a new indie and start again. Now, I'm not trying to probe into the kind of venal things about how much you got and how much you're worth and all of that stuff, but if you want to tell us, please do. It's more a question about... Did you feel that, in actual fact, the fun had gone out of it?
No, and I didn't want to sell up and start again. In fact, the idea of starting again came about, about 3 years later. So I had no idea when we sold the company that I wasn't going to stay for much longer, for example, or I didn't know what I was going to do. But the idea was that certainly when we sold, I was locked in for 3 years. So, and then you sort of see what happens, and it could have stayed within the super indie shine, or gone and done something else, or whatever. And it was only very, very late on in the process that actually there's two of us. We're a sort of business partnership, me and Magnus Temple, and we decided to start a new indie.
It's kind of interesting looking at it forensically, Nick, that even the contractual term when you sell out to a bigger indie is to be locked in. It has the sense of imprisonment, of constraint, of being kettled out of your creativity or whatever, set against a hugely charismatic word, independent, to be independent. Did you actually feel locked in?
I think you can a bit. I mean, to be fair, I think we did some of our best stuff when we were during that period, and you know, the family and One Born Every Minute were all part of that time. So we had some really exciting and really creative times there as well. But I think there isn't anything quite like being truly independent. It's my own view. I think you really feel the wind in your hair, especially when you're just completely master of your own destiny.
Yeah. So in that sense, you would kind of would you recommend almost a culture of permanent revolution, setting up a new indie every 3 years, something like that?
I don't think you could do that. I think you'd kill yourself if you tried.
Okay, we'll come back to you, Nick, and get a sense of some of these other thoughts about access and about meeting commissioners. Mark Raphael, commissioning editor of documentaries at Channel 4. Mark, just give us a kind of perspective from inside Channel 4 about what exactly you do within the commissioning culture, what your focus is, and what you feel about this idea of letting small indies have a look into your world.
Well, I run the Cutting Edge strand, as well as a commissioning series for the documentary department. I suppose if you're a small indie trying to get in to My Diary, or get a look in, as it were, I think it's difficult off the bat. I think you need to have something that I want to see you about, either an idea or a taster tape. And it's hard to have a relationship, which is often the sort of small indies bemoan the fact that they haven't got the relationship. When there's nothing to have a relationship about, as it were. And until the idea comes in that you want to talk about, then you can start having a relationship and a dynamic. I think within Cutting Edge, it allows us to commission small companies that are 2, 3, 4 people to do single films. But it's often I've just commissioned a director who had an idea, had a bit of access, set him in with a company. But it is, that relationship, that dynamic that often small indies feel that they're cut out of is tricky to have in the abstract, as it were. So until you get going on a production, I think that's when you start having a relationship. So I think Karen Hamilton's out there. She, Karen's on her own largely, but we've got a relationship through making a documentary together. But until you have that dynamic, it's difficult to have that.
Yeah. So your argument would be there that rather than sometimes I think that their indies are saying, I feel I don't get access, I feel locked out, I don't, no one gets back to me. Yeah. One of your arguments would be that the key way of building that relationship is having the creative foundations to build it on, which may be a really strong idea with a taster tape or with deep access or something like that. Yeah. One of the things, Mark, that does come up, I think it's it may not feel like this to you, but I think that historically your job, particularly because of the Cutting Edge, its status within Channel 4 and its prime time access and whatever, it's often historically been described as the best job in television. Now, it may not necessarily feel like that to you, but that's...
You've got that, haven't you?
Yeah, no, I've got that. No, I have got that, yeah. But if you think about it, it's probably for this audience one of the slots. I don't necessarily mean Cutting Edge, but I mean the aspiration of having a British documentary or a documentary with a locus here in a changing UK in prime time, 9 o'clock on terrestrial television, reaching out there to potentially very big audiences of people to see your film. Is that for you something that you feel is a burden, actually, having to square that circle of reaching and out to popular audiences and at the same time kind of working with the talent you want to work with? Is that perfect?
No, I don't think it's a burden. Definitely not. I think with Cutting Edge, you're trying to... You've got so many great people to work with. Yeah. So you are sort of cherry picking, hopefully, the best ideas and hopefully the best directors. Yeah. It's an art to land the films in a run because they want them week after week after week, and that can be difficult because you're dealing with real lives and real situations. Yeah. But it isn't a burden. I think the burden is to try and keep going forward, and that's a creative challenge and something you put upon yourself and luckily a lot of the people we work with, take that on and are always trying to go forward and make new films in new ways.
Well, Mark, what we'll do is we'll come back to some of the things that kind of are kind of the do's and don'ts, and some of the things that you might be looking for, much as we also promised with Samantha. I'm going to jump over now to Dermot Lavery from Double Band, who are based in Belfast, but over 10 years or more now, Dermot have been making documentaries for most of the UK networks, and indeed also the networks in the Republic of Ireland, or the All-Ireland marketplace, as it were, and maybe say a little bit about that as well, because that's something that maybe differentiates you from most of the other companies on the panel. So, on you go.
Yeah, it's over 20 years now, Stuart.
Oh, is it? Oh,
yeah,
God, how time flies.
Yeah. I've got an aging painting in the attic somewhere at home. I think at the last count, I think we're on the go about 21 years as an indie based in Belfast.
Yeah.
Myself, my colleague Mike Hewitt, who's out in the audience somewhere there. I can't quite see him, but we kicked off the company in the late 80s. And have managed to survive as a small indie by making programs, making documentaries for a whole range of broadcasters. I think the assumption might have been because we were both a small indie and based in the region that is geographically furthest removed from the metropolitan centre and where all the decisions are made, that it might be tough for us to survive. But we have survived, in our view, quite successfully across that time, because we've done what small indies do best. We've been nimble and creative. We have, kind of moved our ideas across a range of broadcasters. When one plate starts to wobble, we straighten it up and go and get another one going. Yeah. And that's the way we've been able to work. And we've never been out of work in all that time. We're a small indie, but we would consider that there's a kind of an underlying assumption, if you like, in the question for the session, that in some way or other it's that the small indies are the outsiders. But in my view, the time of the small indie has returned.
Yeah.
If it's all about the current kind of notion in broadcasting that there needs to be some sort of creative renewal, then I think broadcasters could be looking to that kind of middle tier of small to medium size indies to kind of renew what television and factual programme making, which is our genre, can do to kind of renew that energy in broadcasting.
Say a little bit about the Ireland marketplace, because it's some people in the audience will pitch to RTE and to other Republic Island broadcasters, and indeed to BBC in Northern Ireland, but it won't be the most common experience. Most people here, I would guess, be pitching to BBC Channel 4 or whatever. So is it for you an important or lucrative market? And there's two parts to that question. One, I guess, of which is culturally, is it important to you to tell stories about a changing Ireland? And then secondly, is there a value in it in the sense of being able to make great documentaries that you want to make?
Well, this is one of the assets, if you want to call it that, of being based in Northern Ireland. We face both into the island, if you like, and to the Republic, where there's 3 broadcasters, in fact, that we can try to get commissions from. But we also face to the east, to the UK market, to the UK networks, BBC, Channel 4, UK TV, and its family of channels. And that's not to mention the local BBC version of their network, BBC Northern Ireland, which has always been a solid, opportunity for us to get commissions. So it's an advantageous position for us, and being a small indie that is specialised, if you like, or for a long time, although that's starting to evolve and change now, in the single kind of blue chip documentary market. We were able to kind of move those ideas to a range of broadcasters. So in any given year, we might be making 4 or 5 single docs for 4 or 5 different broadcasters. But that kind of then assumed quite a lot of work for a small indie.
Yeah, and there might be some people in the audience that are thinking there and calculating the amount of broadcasters that you have that you can pitch to, Dermot, and might be thinking, you jammy bastard, if you're a regional indie in England, you've really usually only got the London-based metropolitan networks to go to. In
yeah.
your case, slightly more.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
So, are you hugely advantaged by being in the nation of Northern Ireland?
How many people are out there? You know, we might have to lock the door and wipe their memories. Yeah, that doesn't stop us going to the BBC in London and still kind of playing the poor mouth, you know, and demanding a better, you know, quota for Northern Ireland in the outworking of their network ambitions across the whole of the UK. But yeah, no, we've always considered that, you know, we're quite privileged to be able to kind of have access to a number of markets. And in fact, there's a number of companies now in Northern Ireland that are facing to the west and, you know, managing to get commissions from Nat Geo, Discovery, and, you know, the American market very successfully.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know if that's replicated in other regions, but it's certainly becoming an opportunity that's growing for us in Ireland.
Good. We'll come back to some of that in a moment, Dermot. But let's move finally, by way of introduction, to Natasha Dack of Tiger Lily. Natasha, why don't you just give us, again, a summation of the work that you're doing and where you fit into the debate, and then I'll come to you about your independent survey, your straw poll. Yeah.
Well, I think Tiger Lily is known for quite a diverse output. I mean, we've worked, myself and my business partner, Nikki Parrott, we actually set up a music video and commercials production company when we graduated from film school a while ago. And we did that for about 3 years, realised that the market was really changing, so we got out of that and got into long-form documentaries and drama. So along the way, over the last 11 years, we've made a couple of feature films. We've made quite a few international co-production documentaries, so Storyville type films. We've just made a True Stories, actually, our first film for them, which is on theatrical release at the moment. In the UK, it's called After the Apocalypse, and that's going to go out in July and more for.
Yeah.
We've also just started producing web content, which is a completely new thing for us, and you know, 13-part kids drama series for BBC now. I mean, we do a lot of different things, and I think in a way that sometimes is a problem for broadcasters because they don't really know how to see us.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that. I mean, because at one level, sometimes you feel that broadcasters are looking for the ultimate specialist, whether that's in specialist factual history, science, or documentaries, in the case of Mark and Sam or whatever. But it's also the case that the market requires you to be quite dexterous and maybe move across genres and seize opportunities in different places.
Yeah, I mean, I'm interested in loads of different things, and so I naturally, you know, I'm interested in history, but I'm interested in, you know, fiction, but what I'm interested in current affairs. So I think what we do
reflects those passions. Yeah. Do you have kind of heavy business meetings with yourself and your partners where you say, this is a kind of dalliance too far? Your fascination with 17th century Dutch painting has taken over, Natasha, and we'll have to reel you in a bit. Yeah.
We have said no more documentaries in Kazakhstan.
Right.
But I think, you know, it's we have had those meetings recently, and I think we are trying to move away from doing those sort of big international co-productions that just take a really long time to finance. You know, and they're great when you make them. They go to film festivals and win awards and all that sort of thing, and get, you know, kudos. But they just can't sustain us as a company. So what we're trying to focus on now is more kind of domestic stuff. And you know, BBC Three, cutting edge. That's really where we want to be aiming.
Now, this straw poll that you did, Natasha, tell us a wee bit about it. Set up the scene here. Were you wandering around the festival tapping people on the shoulders, or was it a drunken meeting back in the bar, or was it a kind of dark stitch-up where you said, I'll get even with these commissioning editors?
No, I mean, I think people, you know, don't want to mow, you know, to turn it into a moan session, but I think, you know, obviously people are really impressed by what Jay Hunt's doing with the kind of shake-up of suppliers, and a lot of people were saying that's a really good thing. We're really pleased about that. But then, you know, there's just some interesting stuff came out, so I'll just read a few.
Yeah, why don't you give us a couple of them, because what I'd like to do is almost use them as an agenda, and then we'll go along and get reactions. Let's take a real killer-diller one from the top shelf, you know.
Okay, well, small indies get pigeonholed by broadcasters who fail to recognise that we can diversify in what we produce. one commissioning editor said, but you make feature docs when discussing a 1-hour single. And this particular producer felt that it didn't take too much imagination to think that they could move from making a feature-length film to a 1 hour.
Yeah, okay.
Or even a series.
So let's go to commissioners. Let's start with you, Samantha. The idea that you pigeonhole production companies, is that something that you recognise that's something that's come from the straw poll?
And I think specialisms are very, very useful in terms of if a company has a reputation for something, a particular type of programme. I'm thinking about Lambert and Kids Behind Bars. Instantly, I knew that they had a specialism in terms of making documentary with children. It's a shorthand. But at the end of the day, the idea is king. And so if an indie has never made a drama doc before, I mean, like one I've commissioned, they've never actually made a programme on television before. Their idea was so powerful that you've just got to say yes, and then you basically talk to them about configuring a team to make sure
it can be realised.
Yes, absolutely, and that's not about imposing a team. I mean, typically what we will do is say either, look, here are kind of 3 execs, go and have a chat with them. They'll be able to support you through the making of that film, or you might want to talk to the following indies. But it's very much about them making that decision, making that call, because it's about constructive creative processes. And what you don't want to do is you commission that amazing idea because of that person's passion foremost, and because of their hard work and graft. And so we're just not in the business of then finding a super indie to realise that. Yeah, absolutely not, because it's got to come from their passion, and they've got to feel in the driving seat of that. And so hopefully where that happens, and that happens a fair bit, you do it in a supportive way. Or, I mean, indeed, with My Brother the Islamist, that was an idea that came out of Rob Leach, who graduated from Bournemouth University. And his tutor just sent the idea to Charlotte, and I had a look at it, this taster tape, and it was just incredible. And we wanted him. He's from Dorset, so we put him in touch with Grace Productions, he'd made one panorama, but they hadn't made beyond that. No.
They're based in Bath, aren't they?
They're based in, I think it's Shepton Mallet, yeah. And because we wanted that idea. But we also wanted to support a young director to make sure that he was it's a controversial subject. So we put in Simon Ford into the team as well.
So that sense of team building can be really, really important for the broadcaster, because it gives you the assurances, the so-called safe pair of hands and whatever. Sometimes, though, for the indie, that can tip into the idea that maybe their own talent is not perceived to be good enough, or that they themselves lack certain kinds of skills. And a corollary of that, Mark, to come along, and then I'm returning to Natasha, the corollary of that is sometimes the perception in the mind of some smaller indies that, that commissioning editors can sometimes play too safe a game in terms of the dozen relationships that they've currently got, and notwithstanding the fact that there's only so many relationships that you can seriously build creatively in your life, there is sometimes the feeling that if I don't know you, you must be shit. That can sometimes be the flavour that comes over. Is that something that you recognise, that you're struggling sometimes to pull together the balance between the number of creative relationships you can have against the openness of access to ideas?
I think it's difficult. I don't think that's how we feel. I remember going back to when I was on the other side of the fence, pitching a film to Simon Dixon, and he just looked at me and was looking at my clothes, and he was trying to work out, is this guy any good? And I think
on the basis of your clothes.
Well, he was talking about the idea, but he was looking at me as if to say, can you really make this? Are you And I think sometimes when you don't know the person on the other side, you are trying to
suss them out, really.
And I think, as Sam's saying, sometimes you do go with it, but you probably put in an exec or there's an editor or somebody in that process, just to give you that bit of comfort.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to come back to this, but Natasha, I wouldn't mind you setting us up with another little charmer from the list there, because that was quite good one. That idea.
Well, I mean, this is kind of going on the same track, I think. But also that there was one story I heard about a producer going to a meeting where they saw their treatment on the table and it said "good idea, right company?" ?
Yeah, good idea, right company, ? I like it, right? Let's get into the forensics of this. Okay, is there a way where, I'm actually going to start with the producers, then come back to the commissioners. Dermot and then Nick, yourself, where you felt that an idea that you instinctively felt was strong was moving away from you, or that you felt the idea simply was nicked or moved, or that in some way the same idea morphed to a bigger company. Is that something that you're familiar with?
There's not a lot new in television, and ideas cycle and recycle all the time and pop up in new forms, and it's hard not to think along the way that your idea that you had a couple of years earlier popped up in some other form, made by a bigger entity, maybe closer to London. So inevitably you're going to get a little bit paranoid about that, because I think that's just the nature of the thing itself. Generally, companies, when they're putting in ideas, they're putting in those ideas, on the basis of some sort of intelligence or brief that has come from the broadcasters. So most of the suppliers will be in the zone. Yeah. So it is, after that, it's about confidence and perception of whether you're able to deliver or not. And I think that's a reasonable enough issue for commissioning editors or broadcasters. So our challenge is to meet that head on, and to meet that head on. If for instance it's us and we pitched an idea that we in our past haven't produced of that like, we have to bring to the table something that will put the decision maker in the comfort zone, whether it's a director or talent in some way. We have to kind of be quite forensic about how we support the idea with the staff or talent that will convince them that, okay, this company hasn't done this before, we as a broadcaster haven't worked with them before, but there are other comforting factors that will make this a goer and prepared to take a risk. Now, the broadcaster, on the other hand, and I think there's some encouraging signs here, has to license that commissioning editor to take those kinds of risks. Risk aversion is a big issue, I think, in broadcasting. And I think now that we're in the context of talking about how broadcasters might broaden the footprint of their suppliers, I think that issue of how commissioning editors are allowed and licensed to take risk is becoming key.
Nick, can I just pick up on that one? And Natasha was nodding. The perception of risk aversion. I mean, have you found yourself in meetings with broadcasters where you feel that they're simply not hearing the kind of risk potential of the project, or that they aren't willing to take a risk with some of your talent, or is that not something you're familiar with?
Sometimes, I mean, to be honest, I think it's a bit of a mixed bag. I think sometimes we pitch things that are stupidly risky, and they're probably quite right to not take the risk. Sometimes we pitch things that are risky, and they sort of have the confidence. So sometimes things get made more risky or less risky, and so on. I think what I was wanting to pick up on there is about this point about being pigeonholed. I mean, I think one thing I think about that is that being pigeonholed can be good. I think I've never been a commissioning editor, but I suspect you've got such a variety of people you can work with, and you probably need a bit of shorthand for what you turn to different people for. And so I would have thought people generally get a bit typecast. And I think, personally, I sort of think that trying to work with that rather than fight it is quite a good thing. I sort of try to think about what is my usefulness to this person. And I remember when we, just after we started Firefly, I remember there was a sort of a herd, a commissioning editor, I think I saw in the room actually earlier, saying something like that they wanted it to be a Firefly sort of thing. And the moment I heard that, I thought, we're made. This is fantastic, because they sort of have in mind what a Firefly sort of thing is. So I think actually pigeonholed, another way of thinking about being pigeonholed is that you've actually got a brand. You've got something that they have in mind about what you are. And I think if you work with that, that can be a really fantastic thing.
Good, thank you. I'm wondering, Natasha, we talked there about pigeonholing. Let's take one final thought from the survey, and then I'm going to move us on to the next phase of the debate.
Okay.
What was the last one?
Do these big initiatives from chief creative officers have the backing of the commissioning editors at the coalface?
Okay, the question is really that the major initiatives as laid out by the broadcasters, I think probably here, given the various different noises that have been made, there's a mixture of that being Channel 4 and BBC. If I could address the Channel 4 one first, because it's something I clearly obviously have a part in and a role to play in. At the beginning of January at the Salford Media Festival, David Abraham addressed what he considered to be one of the kind of key components of change that he wanted to bring into place in Channel 4. And it was a mixture of creative renewal, a term that people have used in the aftermath of us decommissioning Big Brother and freeing up then 65 million to the original programme budget. But secondly, also, I think beginning to address some more kind of, if you like, cultural behavioural issues around how he felt creative agencies and creative organisations should work. David's somebody who, having set up St Luke's, cares a lot about the nature of the creative business. That he thinks a lot about it. He talks a lot about it. And he, in the process of doing that, wanted to kind of be an actant for change within Channel 4. And so mapped out some of the kind of key things that he wanted to see. More new companies, greater diversity of supply. And he also, when he appointed Jay Hunt as Chief Creative Officer, gave her as one of her tasks, one of her key tasks, to lead a change in diversity of supply within Channel 4. Jay's been phenomenal, actually, and no question about that. She immediately said, "Look, let's really make this work. Let's push this as openly as we can." She herself made a commitment to a significant numbers of days across the year, both in London and across the nations and regions, where she herself would make herself open to one-to-ones, to small group surgeries, to, in some places we've had to do it as kind of small seminar groups, maybe of kind of 10 indies or whatever, but on the basis of kind of confidentiality, tell me what you really think, and it's been very open, commissions have come from it. But in the process of doing that, she has also required our heads of department and indeed our commissioning editors, including Mark, to take within their own personal objectives a set of creative requirements that are part of their objectives for the year, commissioning new companies, commissioning companies they haven't previously worked with before, commissioning companies from the nations or the nations and regions, commissioning companies that are not part of their the proven output of their department, a whole mix of different things that are locked into people's business and personal objectives. Now, these things are tied, and I guess in the kind of old phrase of Karl Marx, the economic determinants, because they're part of the bonuses that we do or don't earn at Channel 4. Some of those bonuses are tagged to commercial achievement, the amount of share that we can generate across the Channel 4 network, but some of them are behavioural. They're about how we commission, the way we commission, and whatever. And I think in lots of ways, Jay and David, because he was driving it, wanted to drive creative change, but also wanted us to be better. I mean, we had been a broadcaster that maybe had become maybe slightly kind of inward-looking, maybe slightly obsessed with ourselves, maybe a broadcaster that maybe needed to kind of take a look at the next generation of creatives that were coming through. So quite a lot of kind of hard lessons. We did surveys that kind of told us those things. We regularly survey the independent production sector, and we take back to the commissioning culture, sometimes warts and all, the stories that have been told about us. So I think leading cultural change is part of my job along with Jay, and encouraging greater diversity of supply. That's kind of where we are at Channel 4 and all of that, and we're already seeing both in terms of the amount of hours committed to meeting new companies and the amount of projects that have been commissioned from the back of those meetings growing quite exponentially. I can give you some facts and figures later on in the meeting, but I just wondered, jumping over to Sam, whether you felt that the changes that were in the BBC, where we've seen quite significant changes about network supply review, we've seen the move to Salford, the putting quality first manifesto, quite a lot of different, if you like, management change mechanisms. Is that something that filters down to the commissioning culture?
Yeah, I mean, completely. So typically when I look at my slate, I'll have a very clear idea about how many nation hours I've left to commission. It's divvied up. or how many regional hours, and there'll be times when, you know, no more London hours. And so, but most importantly, most people probably know this, but we have a structure, we have a number of execs who are nations facing, like James Hayes, Nick Shearman and Sam Anthony, and their job is to work in those nations with those companies and bring them forward to us as commissioners to get to know and put key people in and develop a relationship that's sustainable and grows. And so, you know, I mean, from my point of view, that seems to flourish and is effective. And then as commissioners, we will go to the nations and be talking directly, and there'll be an opportunity to meet. So we don't get bonuses based on what we commission. But, you know, there's complete clarity about the parameters of that. And, you know, just had some fantastic things coming out of the nations, like this, you know, the scheme is a gift. It's brilliant. And so, you know, for us, it's about the representation on screen of the regions and nations as well, and ensuring that's sort of, you know, as important as the programme makers and where they're from.
Yeah, I mean, I've sort of been, you know, I'm born and raised in Scotland and live there a couple of days, 3 days a week. And, you know, the scheme, which is a BBC Scotland observational documentary set in a housing scheme called Onthank in Kilmarnock, has been a huge, huge phenomenon. I mean, it's unthinkable that a TV programme in this era can get a 65% share of the audience. I mean, quite staggering. And it is documentary now, obviously, within the kind of culture of documentary that we are now much more familiar to. Clearly, you can see the interventions of the filmmaker and all the rest of it. But nonetheless, you know, this is an observational documentary that's effectively turned people from a very, very deprived social housing scheme in the west coast of Scotland, which has got all the kind of problems around drug abuse and third generation unemployment, structural problems around what we might call the underclass, and yet hugely popular, and they've kind of in an odd way turned into stars, almost like a kind of real version of Shameless. And it's been quite an extraordinary phenomenon, which leads you to wonder whether it's the case now that we are creating these various things. We talk about nations and regions, we've talked about opt-out and the Northern Ireland system and that. Some people might say, and there might even be people in the audience here that say, that feels like the BBC and Channel 4 are engaged in some exercise of social engineering creative supply, rather than allowing the best to flourish no matter where it is. Well, you know,
you do not. I mean, I sit there with a slate, and if there is not a brilliant idea from the nations or regions, whether they're indie or in-house, it's not going to get commissioned. You know, the bar will continue to be high, and it's not fair. It would not be fair on anyone to commission something that just bombed, because you've got to invest in the future, and no one wants the first sort of commission for a small or regional indie to be a disaster, because what was the point in starting that relationship, commissioning relationship? So, you know, I think the fresh scheme that we run, the first-time director scheme, is a really valuable opportunity for lots of indies and lots of execs from small companies really invest in it. So Ross Wilson, Matchlight, really invests in it. So does Cat Lewis from 9 Lives in Manchester. Yeah. And, you know, they back it. They really back it because they believe in it. And then, you know, we commission singles, and from those, a series can, you know, it's the start of a relationship.
Mark, asking you similar question. Do you feel increasingly tied in or restrained by the various different objectives, or the, you know, there must be nations commissions or new company commissions, or is it focusing and liberating? What does it feel like from the perspective of an ideas commissioner?
I think we've just been encouraged. Jay's come in and she has shaken it up a bit, and she's encouraged us to, you know, broaden our supply base. And so I think, like you say, we've been having seminars. I mean, Dermot will, you know, testify. It's producing new commissions, and the relationships are becoming more diverse, and we are focused on different areas. And, you know, we've commissioned Green Bay, and we've commissioned lots of different. Double Band have just been commissioned, and so we are out there much more overtly than perhaps we were maybe 2-3 years ago.
Nick, you must be thinking, sitting there saying, oh, these regions producers, moaning bastards, they get everything they want, and we are embattled here now with all these bloody new quotas. Do you think it's these quotas are kind of things that have created an understanding within the production community, or do you think that there's a kind of a fissure, different people with different views? I had a conversation with a producer from Leeds, very, very good producer, and I sensed from him as I was talking about all of this with him that he felt slightly frustrated by what he perceived to be the power of the nations, which actually, when you're from Scotland or Northern Ireland, doesn't feel like a powerful place. You know what I mean? It's a kind of odd thing. It feels as if we're in an era where the different parts of the UK are in some kind of tense relationship with each other.
I don't think the first thing you said I thought.
No.
I agree with diversity of supply. I think that there should be plenty of room for everybody, and I also think that if you have too few suppliers, you end up with a kind of blandness that you really see on telly. I mean, I see it sitting there watching telly at home. So I think diversity of voices, particularly on Channel 4, is really important. So I completely support it, and if there are occasions when I get to miss out on something because there's a better idea from somewhere else in the country, then so be it. Yeah. I suppose there's a potential flip side of taking Sam at her word earlier that you were saying that you get to a point where you do have to say no more non-regional commissions, for example. And then I don't know what you would do at that point if actually there was just a brilliant idea that came through from London. Would you presumably save it up for next year or something? I don't know.
I think there's probably enough flexibility amongst the slates, to obviously pull that off, But it's a pressure, you know. We have to really justify that in terms of why, why that one.
And another similar pressure, Sam, is that something that my colleagues at Channel 4 clearly don't have as a tension or another kind of management issue is the balance between indie and in-house, which you're by necessity required to play a role in, albeit I think that maybe it's the case that that's maybe something that impacts very dramatically, say, in areas like, for example, drama or comedy or whatever, but nonetheless, even in documentary and factual, there is some kind of tension, as it were, between ideas generated, as it were, by in-house teams, where it's colleagues that maybe you know and like, and colleagues that maybe themselves, their jobs depends on their department turning over content or whatever. So it must be quite difficult to sometimes say, oh, there's a bit of pressure on us to go with the in-house team here, even though this indie idea is better.
I don't know about you, Mark, but my job is very unpolitical.
Yeah.
So I don't inhabit this world where I'm kind of feeling political pressure.
Yeah.
And I think it's got to be like that. Mm-hmm. It's got to be about the best idea and the best people to execute it. So, I mean, the thing is, everyone thinks that someone else is getting more face time.
Yeah.
And everyone imagines that I'm spending a lot of time in-house. And I'm sure if anyone's from in-house, we never see her, you know. And I've never met Nick, and he's made Kill It, Cook It, Eat It and a number of programmes on BBC Three. So I don't know if I answered that question, but there is just by the very nature that we are close in proximity to in-house doesn't give them an advantage. Because my email has crashed while I've been away because of all the indies and all the nations and all the regions who are are trying. And it's we don't sit down strategically and sort of say, right, we've got to spend this amount of time with with each. But it's never going to be fair, is it? Mm-hmm. Because it is ultimately about starting a creative relationship, and once you've started it, it's quite hard to then be distracted. And there's only a certain amount of face time you can have. Yeah,
very generously, Sam, you actually said earlier on that you would just give us a little glimpse into what you really are looking for. So why don't we take a couple of minutes on that, and Tasha, you can take some notes there if you want. And I'll come back to you because I wanted to kind of start as also starting to try and get a checklist of what the indies, who are largely on this side of the room, feel that we could do further to improve this area. What more could broadcasters do? I'd quite like to kind of end up with certainly some things where there could be grounds for progress. But Sam, why don't you start with a bit of transparency? What are you really looking for?
Well, I'm sort of mindful that we've had Our War, which is an extraordinary landmark series for BBC Three. If people haven't seen it, it's essentially the story of soldiers told by footage of their head cams. And the MOD we've been working with for sort of 2 years to accumulate this incredible footage that tells their personal stories. That's been commissioned by Harry Lansdowne. And we've got Kids Behind Bars coming up. I'm looking for what is going to land in a year's time in terms of exceptional access, but foremost sort of thinking what's the visual entry point to that, and what makes that BBC Three as opposed to something that would sit on BBC One or indeed BBC Two. And then I've been talking a lot about kind of the wonderful Small Team Big World that's been made by 9 Lives, that's coming out as a series, and which is the sort of story of Jazz and Bev, a mum and daughter who is restricted growth. It's really not about their disability at all. It's about this amazing girl Jazz, who's her mum's carer, and there's very dramatic things that are going to happen in this series. But what's amazing about it is it makes you cry, but there's enormous levity, and you laugh a lot as well. And it's really easy for me to commission very serious content. And in fact, BBC Three's gone from a channel that was primarily seen as an entertainment channel a few years ago to a channel where documentary really rates, and in a way I think, certain people underestimate, young audiences and how they emotionally and intellectually want to engage in material. But I am looking for something that's funny, and that's not in terms of directors poking fun or a cynical sort of view. I think the humour's got to come from within the casting. I think the big thing that probably lots of us are thinking is it's very, very difficult with formats at the moment, cracking a format, because particularly with a young audience, in a way they've been brought up with Wife Swap and Big Brother, and so when they look at documentary they think that's innovative because it's fresh. They haven't seen tons of it, and so sort of the middle ground, the kind of more features and formats territory is not rating at the moment. So the fact end side of what we do, so Don't Tell the Bride, Snug, Marry and Avoid, but it's that middle ground, and I think that's my sort of dilemma. So it would be great to be surprised, and things, if you think, God, we can't do that, we can't pull that off, that's a good place to be.
Yeah, that's great. Just one little question, Sam, and then I'd come to Mark and get a perspective from the kind of key priorities for him just now. Is it the case that quite a lot of filmmakers, documentary filmmakers, some of whom will be in the audience, actually do feel a wee bit hardwired to think in terms of intensely serious subject matter? Do you still feel that you don't get enough documentaries that are cast in a kind of more humorous tone or more satirical tone, or with a different kind of approach?
I think actually, I think humour in terms of narrative is very, very difficult to develop, isn't it?
Yeah,
so if you've got a sort of serious content, dramatic subject matter, you can see at the point of commission where that might go. Whereas with it, if you're commissioning something, I don't mean to relay the sort of sense that I want sort of documentary comedy. It's more things that has real, rich emotional range. That you're going to smile about, as well as kind of be really moved.
Thank you. Mark, yourself at Channel 4 and indeed Cutting Edge, what would you say were the key three priorities for you just now?
Well, Cutting Edge goes on. There's going to be another run later on in the year. There's a real demand for single films. Single films at 9 that can run in Cutting Edge. Single films at 10 that might not be a Cutting Edge, but just might be a fun single film, which is a different offering when the news is on. I suppose we're just looking to expand upon what we do. We've got 24 hours on in A&E at the moment, which is doing very well for us. We've got One Born Every Minute coming back. But I suppose we're looking for maybe some talent. That would be good. I think we're also thinking about different areas where we can make films. different spaces that we can go into that feel a different offering for our audience. And I suppose from my point of view, it's just trying to find just killer stories. You know, sometimes they come in and, you know, it's an amazing single narrative. Boy Called Alex was an amazing single narrative. You know, Katie was an amazing single narrative. They come in, but just keeping an eye on that range of films, which within Cutting Edge you have to have that range. But I mean, you know, I'm definitely keen to get more.
Do you feel there's quite a lot of pressure on the role and this sort of differentiating between the role of a commissioner and the role, if you like, a curatorial role of someone who's having to select across a range of maybe 20 titles or 12 titles or whatever? Do you feel that actually you sometimes let very good ideas go just simply in the balance they don't work? Or no. I don't think that's true. I never think I've got too many single narratives. Yeah. I might think occasionally I've got too many, you know, perhaps, you know, too many in one area. Yeah. But you know, you choose the best one, and I don't think nothing. You don't not commission anything that's nagging away in the back of your head, thinking, "I wish I'd done that. Wish I'd done that." You do it. Yeah. I suppose you know, from our point of view, we really are, you know, hungry for more offerings, and so. Right now, we're doing quite well with our big shows. Yeah. But what next? What next? Yeah. Key moment. Natasha, I'm going to come to you because to lead us off, and I'll go right down the list of the panel. What I'd like to do now, by way of kind of pulling this together, and then I'm going to come to the audience for comments, questions, statements, or whatever. So please, if you could start preparing your thoughts and questions. I wouldn't mind going along and getting from each one of you what you, as an individual company, producing company, think that broadcasters could simply do better, that you want in order to address what I think most people would agree is a challenge for the industry. What's the thing?
Well, one of the things that springs to mind is that it would be nicer if we got a quicker response from people. So, you know, sometimes it feels like we're just shouting into the abyss. And, you know, where's that idea gone? And 2 months down the line, I mean, we've had things that have, you know, we've got a rejection for like a year later, and that's been sitting on e-coms for a while,
And so this idea really that sometimes ideas that maybe a kind of development team or an individual or a person that's working in the company has been really passionate about, they've got together, they've worked on their research, they've put it into the system, and it just simply goes into some kind of good night and you don't hear anything back or whatever. And is that, I mean, obviously it's not a great thing for your business or indeed for our business, but is the thing there that it's just simply rude, or is it that it's actually to some extent demotivating and that you end up worse, not ever wanting to go back to that broadcaster again? Is that right?
Well, I mean, I'm under no illusions about how busy you are as commissioning editors, but I think, you know, it is a mixture of rudeness and it's not demotivating because we'll always take someone else, but it's but there's basic manners, as it were.
Dermot, Double Band, give us a sense of what you think is the key thing that broadcasters could do better.
I'm not saying this, Stuart, because you're the chair of the session here. Good. But there's something this year happened, I think, with Channel 4 that feels like a bit of a revolution. That I think kind of leads the way, because, you know, by contrast, I would have been, you know, very critical of Channel 4 two years ago, because it just so happens that coincidentally, as soon as the economy went into to a spin, Channel 4 started to pull its horns in, and you know, companies, smaller companies in the nations and regions found it hard to get the meetings or to get gigs away. So, you know, what Channel 4 have done this year is kind of acknowledged the kind of the nature of human relations in broadcasting, and about relationships between commissioning editors and companies, and new companies and companies that want to break in. So, you know, if Channel 4 acknowledged that renewal was important and diversity of supply was important, they were going to have to do something that kind of broke that tyranny of commissioning editors worrying about the next day's ratings, about, you know, the security of their jobs, all those kinds of things, you know. So what Channel 4 have set out to do is, you know, commissioning editors having to work with a new company, having to work with being incentivized to work with a new company or a new company from the region, on a bonus system. It's searingly obvious, and yet it's never been done before. And it's an acknowledgement that, you know, people are in a pressure cooker situation, and they need a license to make risky decisions. You know, and if all the broadcasters kind of took up that baton, and indeed if Channel 4 continue with that kind of honest strategy into the future, I think it could have a revolutionary kind of effect.
There's one of the things there, Dermot, that you mentioned that was probably worth bringing it up, because I think that for members of the audience this will be another kind of, you know, thing that kind of registers with them, is that I think a couple of years ago Channel 4, due to the then downturn in the advertising market, had taken £50 million, effectively £50 million out of the commissioning budget, where many of our areas of the schedule that were maybe around the fringes of the schedule in kind of late peak and whatever, maybe the 11 o'clock strand or whatever, where we'd frequently used short runs of three-part shows or single documentaries or whatever, often with companies, smaller scale companies, and companies that maybe you know, were bringing an idea that didn't need maybe the kind of infrastructural support that a bigger rig show would need or whatever. And once you strip out the money that supports that stranded kind of 11 o'clock strand, although it was never the intention, I think it had the unintended consequence of actually probably taking, you know, 40 or 50 companies that we were commissioning out of our commissioning cycle. Not that that was ever the intent, but it was certainly the consequence of it. And it might be worth, just by way of illustration through statistics, you know, Channel 4 traditionally has over the years tended to have, you know, about, you know, 400 suppliers, contracted companies. Now, clearly, as the process of consolidation has happened over the years, that number has declined for the first time actually below 300, and we are keen to kind of look at how we can strategically, if not reverse that, at least begin to address some of the kind of challenges, because another thing was happening alongside that, which is for the first time ever, Channel 4 was hiring and contracting a whole range of new digital media companies who didn't form part of the 300 or 400, because the way that we're measured in terms of contract via Ofcom is on what's called transmission write-off. So when a programme is transmitted, you count that as part of your origination, and the company then is credited as having been contracted. Our digital media worked through a different system, and we simply weren't capturing the number of companies. So the irony is that at the very moment when our company numbers contracted was in decline, another part of it was inclining and was going up. And I do feel that at Channel 4 that if we were to move to a system where we said, oh, you know, it would be so much more convenient for editors, or it would be so much more economically valuable to Channel 4 to have a much smaller number of companies, I think you would literally take the soul out of Channel 4, and in the process of doing that would actually make it a less exciting place to work and a less exciting place on air. So I don't think there's anybody at Channel 4 that genuinely wants to manage a situation where new and small and emergent indies can't get in. You know, it actually works against what makes us different. But with that in mind, Nick, what would you say that broadcasters could do better?
I think access to commissioning editors is only a bit of what makes a big difference. Actually, I think the more joined up a broadcaster is, from that point on, the better, and you really notice it. I mean, if you're pitching to a broadcaster where everybody's talking to each other, communication's really good, there's a real mutual feel for what that channel or what that department or what that genre wants to have on air, then it makes a massive difference to us on the outside. And it sometimes feels a bit when you're pitching to a broadcaster like, if I can use a far-fetched analogy, like you're at a coconut shy and you've got this ball, and the way in the distance is that coconut you're trying to hit, and you've got to the first thing you've got to do is you've got to get that ball through a hoop, but the hoop's moving, and that's the commissioning editor. You've got to get it through there, but once it's flying through the air and going through that hoop, you've got to get it through another hoop that's moving, and maybe moving in a completely different direction, and may not be lined up, and then there's another hoop behind there as well. So the chances that your ball's actually going to go through all three hoops and hit the coconut is really, really slim.
They're quite remote, yeah.
So, but if the broadcasters all kind of, they're all communicating really well, they all want the same thing as much as is possible, then the hoops at least are in some sort of alignment. You might be able to get it through.
Yeah. So despite all their good degrees and the features they get in broadcast and media guardian, they're in effect a coconut shy. Yeah, pretty much so. I like that. Joined up communication and mutuality, access from Dermot, and greater response time from Natasha. I wonder now if we could bring up the house lights, if that's possible, so that I can kind of see people in the audience. And as we're doing that, I know that the microphones are with us here, yes. And who could help us with our first thoughts or statements or comments? Who's going to be first up? Yes, there's a question there from gentleman here. Down here, please. Down here, yeah. And did I see another hand over here? Yeah. Yes.
Okay, it's Mark Ashmore from Future Artists based in Salford. It's kind of a bit of a statement, really, or just something to throw in there, really. Understanding how Channel 4 have sort of evolved and changed, it was really interesting to hear that, is basically... I've started working a lot with 4 Talent, actually teaching down in Channel 4, down in London. I've been down there 3 times. Joe Taylor and Colin Campbell-Austin kind of picked us up off of Facebook because of the work that we're doing up there. Have brought us in, and we've always been able to chat to them and that kind of thing. And now we're slowly evolving and getting a really good relationship with Channel 4 through 4 Talent. And what's slowly, hopefully, will happen at some point is we can start to speak to commissioners and that kind of thing, yeah. So where I'm heading with this is that we're based in Salford. Media City is literally 5 minutes away from us, yet we can't get any access to the culture that is there. And we've tried and we've set up meetings, and what seems to happen is there's a pool at Channel 4, there's a change. There's lots of people doing lots of cool things, and it's very open, but it doesn't seem to be on my own doorstep. That with the BBC. I just wondered, hearing what you guys were saying, I can sort of see from the quota aspects and from the diversity aspects. So I get to travel down to London and get the access, but on my 5 minutes away, I can't get in. It's interesting.
So it's kind of slightly counterintuitive, but let's, although Natasha's not here to talk about the politics of the Bee because she's a commissioner rather than, a company strategist, clearly the opening up of Salford Quays is one of its intentions is to bring more connectivity to the north, the west, and the north of England more broadly. Is it something that you feel confident will across time happen, Sam?
I mean, I'd say in your specific circumstances, then give me your card and I'll find out who you need to speak to and do my best to do that. I mean, you've obviously, Channel 4 has come up with a very clear strategy, and that's new. We've been working on things for probably a longer time. That's not to say they're perfect, and we're absolutely listening to any suggestions, moving forward. That does seem odd. It really does in terms of...
I think one of the things as well is that the Salford Quays is, of course, only just being occupied as we speak, so it is very, to some extent, very early days, and of course part of it is also the relocation of internal BBC departments as well, sport and 5 Live and online and whatever. So I think that within a couple of years' time there'll be a much, much bigger constituency of people there. And I would guess actually the dialogue, as always happens locally, will come about. My only thought for saying that is Pacific Quay, which is the Glasgow equivalent of Salford Quays, is now built. It's wholly occupied. It's slightly over-occupied in the sense that they've got some staffing problems in terms of the amount of staff that are in there. The studios are busy all the time. In fact, it's actually quite hard to get the studios now. They're so busy. And so in a sense, that feels, certainly in a Scottish context, as if that dialogue is there, but maybe not yet in Manchester. There's another statement or question up the back there, and then I think here in the middle. Yeah, so at the back, yeah.
Hi, I'm Iris from Women with a Movie Camera. I wanted to ask Natasha how she got her first commission and what advice she'd give to people who are starting out to get there first.
Natasha, your first commission, how you got it and what you'd recommend.
I'm just trying to think what that was actually. It was a really long time ago. I think it
Is
was...
it burnt into your heart? Is that one where
well,
you
no,
thought,
I can tell you about one, the easiest commission that I ever got, which was for a documentary called Black Power Salute, where I showed the commissioning editor a photograph and said, would you be interested in knowing more about this? And the answer was yes, and that was the commission.
Yeah, this was the Tommy Smith, the 1968
yeah.
Black Power, yeah. Okay, Olympics. So there you have it. Profound image, straight in the door, brook no nonsense, and walk away the door. It's that simple. Yeah. Hamish.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hamish Mikera from Documentaries at Channel 4. I mean, Stuart, I think you're dead right that there is a kind of real urge to address the kind of narrowing of our supply base at Channel 4 that's driven by the Chief Executive and the Chief Creative Officer, and that things are going to change. And I think that one of the questions that, as a small independent, you need to ask yourself is, where are the new points of entry into that? And I think, you know, For Talent and what you're doing with Nations and Regions is a very good way to get in, as is... you know, there is a talent ladder with First Cut where new directors can actually hone their skills. They can get a commission, they can get a program on air. And we've been very, I think, successful recently in actually taking people from First Cut on to directing within Channel 4. The other one that I think is really worth noting is that multi-platform commissioning has changed at Channel 4. It's been moved within the actual program commissioning departments, and each department has a multi-platform commissioning editor. These people are really worth getting to know and worth knocking on the doors of. They're all looking for new companies. They're looking for a new kind of supplier. And in the case of Documentaries, it's Kate Quilton, very energetic commissioning editor. Well worth using that as another route.
As another route in. Yeah, thank you, Hamish. I mean, one of the things that we've instituted at 4 and some of the managers are about today is a small fund of money. It's actually a couple of million we have over our launch phase, which is the Alpha Fund. Now, the Alpha literally means the beginning, the A, it starts there. And this is a fund that we spend on creative ideas that we're looking out there that are almost, in a sense, in advance of the commissioning editor. It's often the case that, in fact, both Sam and Mark have talked there about how they can be impressed if somebody comes along with, say, a taster tape or access to a character, and that's what ignites the desire to have the conversation. Well, sometimes if you're a small company, you want to try and find a wee bit of support maybe to kickstart ideas and get them off the ground and whatever. And as long as there's a strong initial idea, Channel 4's Alpha Fund, we've already supported, I think, probably about 40 different companies since launch. So we've got plenty of kind of work to still be done, and the fund is by no means spent. Best thing to do there is to work through our media project managers, and if you want to know who they are, it's on 4producers.co.uk in the creative diversity section of Channel 4, and all their names and contact details are there, and they've got access to this seed fund money that is in advance of the commissioning editor. The only thing I would say about that fund, by way of kind of clarity here, is it's not a fund to duplicate the role of the commissioning editor. It's in advance of the commissioning editor to strengthen ideas for the system rather than to try and second guess what they're up to or in any way duplicate what they're doing. Anyway, there's a question here. Yeah.
Hi, Anna Higgs from Quark Films, happily working with Stuart's Nations and Regions. We have an office in North Wales and in London. I think Hamish's point about a talent ladder is really useful, but there's actually, I kind of think, a need for an indie ladder.
Yeah.
We, as a company, I think I'm quite worried about, for example, the disappearance of 3 Minute Wonders, because that was our way in with several different directors to Channel 4. And we co-produced a first cut with a bigger company. Yep. And even after that, we're told explicitly in a meeting, worse than, I think, the piece of paper with Right Company, saying this is brilliant, but I'm not going to let you do it. It has to be done with one of 5 companies. But, you know, we've now since gone on to hour-longs. We've done a Wonderland for BBC, etc. But for talent, and I think you have to. There is a producer ladder need, and we've done it by slogging through 5 years. But I know lots of small indies, without moaning, have really not managed to get through that, because particularly the micro companies that are 2 or 3 people, like Natasha says, it's too hard to be doing these massive international co-productions. Yeah. It's really interesting to see where the balance between talent spotting and also kind of capability development in companies and in creative entrepreneurs is working within broadcasters.
I think that's right, and I mean, quite how we kind of make it happen. I think it's in some cities happens slightly more organically than others, and it's good when it does. One thing I would say, though, is I think you're not alone in regretting the disappearance of 3 Minute Wonders for a whole range of reasons, because I think that not only was it a good starting place for small companies, it also had a degree of kind of on-screen visual diversity about it. Often it was where kind of slightly mad animations would pop up, or kind of, and often formally different approaches to micro-narrative and whatever. So I think you're not alone in that. One of the arguments that was put forward, and I think, again, this goes back to the role of Channel 4, is managing the whole range of different diversities that we have to manage. And obviously that is down to me in some respects to manage those various things. And one of the strong things that come in, it's not just because the production company that do Forethought.tv are based in Northern Ireland. There are actually 3 companies, Waddell Media, Atta and Johnson Productions, so there are 3 companies in Northern Ireland. And it's not just simply a nations or a nations and regions quota thing. It's actually that Channel 4 is also required by its licence to reflect diversity of opinion and life across the UK. So Forethought.tv is actually a much stronger way of delivering diversity of opinion than 3 Minute Wonders was, but 3 Minute Wonders was better at delivering diversity of visual look, if you like, you know. So it's kind of in a way that we've maybe lost on the swings and gained on the roundabouts slightly, but I think you're not wrong. I know that Tabitha in the arts department has got plans to bring back some of the openings later at night, actually, not in the post news slot, but later at night, because she too bemoans the disappearance of 3 Minute Wonders. So you're not alone in that. I think you've got some
It wasn't meant as a
insiders
direct critique of Forethought.tv. I think it's really interesting, but I think it was, I remember really clearly our first commission from Kate Vogel, and having that moment of she was willing to take a punt on our company as well as almost a first-time director. And it really did give us a momentum and kind of helped us survive in that first year. So those kind of investments and those opportunities, because stuff like the Fresh Scheme is absolutely brilliant for directors as well. It's about where you can start building that momentum and get that sense of, oh, okay, so I do slightly know who you are because I watched that series of 3 Minute Wonders.
I think you're right. I think it's slightly trickier as a genre documentary in some ways, because the director is kind of king in some ways, and like you say, with the company, the director can go on to another company who've got another good idea, and it is tricky. But I think that comes with a bit of time and momentum.
I'd say the same. I mean, out of Fresh, we've had a number of directors that have gone on. Max Fisher's making Kids Behind Bars for us, that have gone on to carry on, and we want to invest in them. But it's more about the director than it is the company.
But often the company has developed that director and their idea through several projects. That's the big kind of investment.
Okay, there's a gentleman there, please.
Hello.
Hello.
Well, there is another avenue, which is the Channel 4 News Film Fund, and I think, Stuart, you know that we work with indie in Glasgow has got a deal with us. They do 4 films a year, and I mean, for us, I mean, I make 25 to 30. I mean, they're shorter films, they're 10 to 15 minutes, but I like small indies because we are perfectly set up for them to come to us. We want people with low overheads, and we work with sole filmmakers or micro indies. I mean, Natasha and I are talking about trying to get things away together. So, I mean, from our point of view, that is definitely something that works. Channel 4 News is a great place for indies to come to pitch. I think one of the things to bear in mind, though, is because it's Channel 4 News, there's a very strong journalistic element. So it needs to be something that's going to be very journalistic, that will work on a news programme. But it's still something that I think Channel 4 have continued to put money into this fund, and I think it does provide support for quite a few indies who work with us.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. I mean, I think that's some things that often maybe indies aren't noticing, that Channel 4 News, whilst clearly it's produced by ITN, it's independently produced by ITN, and given that we all know the kind of stories that it's broken over the years, and the role of John and Krishnan Guru Murthy and whatever as the kind of anchor presenters, it also has an indies fund to bring stories from different parts of the UK onto air. Now, you wouldn't necessarily know it because the news presenters introduce the piece runs in its own terms, and then there may or may not be a studio debate after it, and the credits for the indie are at the end of the show. So it maybe is slightly masked in terms of you knowing about it, but it's certainly a great place to kick off. I mean, the one that I think a lot of good, smart, kind of journalistic focusing companies have used as a stepping stone into dispatches or to get recognised elsewhere in the channel. And just on that, one massive plug on behalf of Channel 4 News. There's a documentary going out on Tuesday night, The Killing Fields of Sri Lanka, which is the analysis of the end of the Civil War in Sri Lanka and the range of kind of war crimes and genocide that happened in the last days of the war. Quite the most staggering and challenging piece of television I've ever seen in my life, and the fact that that's on television now and that Channel 4 had to put it at 11 o'clock because it's not something we could have put at the Watershed at 9, quite staggering television. And when you watch it, it will be one of the most difficult watches you've ever had in your life. But at the end of that, just sit and think about whether it would be possible that television stations elsewhere would have put that challenging footage on air. And maybe it's worth also reflecting on whether we do have still a very strong ecosystem of great television in Britain, but clearly still with some way to go to get our most creative people and companies on air. So on that note, which was admittedly a bit of a plug for Channel 4, but it comes really from the bottom of my heart. Trust me, this one is great. Phenomenally award-winning television that will mark an era for Channel 4. Can I thank you all for coming? But first of all, could you put your hands together for our panel, please?